Jack was out on his usual hike, enjoying the peaceful silence of the forest. The sun was shining, birds chirped in the trees, and the only sounds were his footsteps on the soft dirt path. It was a perfect day for him, a break from the busy city life. But as he rounded a bend in the trail, he spotted something unusual. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, but as he got closer, he saw her. An alien woman lying unconscious on the forest floor. She was beautiful, with skin that shimmered faintly under the sunlight, and her clothes were unlike anything Jack had ever seen. They were sleek, metallic, and unlike anything in the world he knew. His heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, Jack rushed over to her. His first instinct was to help, so he gently turned her over, checking for any injuries. She was warm, breathing, but not awake. He kneeled beside her, unsure of what to do next. Should he call for help? Was she dangerous? Just as he pulled out his phone, ready to dial for assistance, the woman's eyes flickered open. Her gaze was intense, and for a moment, Jack felt like he was staring into something far more ancient and powerful than anything he had ever encountered. She blinked a few times, disoriented, before her eyes focused on him. She spoke, her voice soft yet firm. "Who are you?" Jack took a step back, his breath caught in his throat. I'm Jack. I found you unconscious here. Are you all right?" he asked, keeping his distance just in case. The woman slowly sat up, her movements graceful, but a bit hesitant. "Where am I?" she asked, looking around as if she had never seen Earth before. "This is Earth," Jack said, still trying to understand what he was dealing with. You're not from here, are you?" She looked at him carefully. "No, I am from a different place. My name is Lyra. I am not from this world." Jack's mind raced. An alien. That's what she was. But why was she here? How did she end up in the middle of a forest? He swallowed hard. "Are you in trouble? Can I help you?" Lyra looked away for a moment, as if she were lost in thought. "I don't know. Perhaps," she said quietly, her voice tinged with something Jack couldn't quite place. Fear or regret. Maybe both. "Okay," Jack said, trying to sound calm even though his heart was racing. "You can stay with me for now. I'll help you figure out what's going on." Lyra met his eyes then, and there was a flicker of something in her gaze. A silent plea, a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "I cannot stay for long," she said. "There are things that could hurt you if you keep me here." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Things? Like who?" "Others," she replied, her voice low, almost afraid. "You wouldn't understand. I am not like you." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He knew this was no ordinary encounter. This wasn't just a lost traveler. This woman, this alien, was here for a reason, and he had no idea how deep the mystery went or what kind of danger was involved. But for now, all he could do was offer her safety. "We'll figure it out," Jack said, his voice steady. "But you're safe here. For now." The days following Lyra's arrival were strange for Jack. He never imagined he'd be living with an alien princess, but she was no ordinary alien. There was something mysterious about her. She wasn't just from another world. She was royalty, a princess of an ancient, powerful race. One evening, as Jack sat across from Lyra by the fire, he noticed the sadness in her eyes. She seemed distant, lost in her thoughts. He couldn't help but wonder what her life had been like before she crash-landed on Earth. Lyra noticed Jack's gaze and sighed, her eyes dropping to the ground. She seemed torn between telling him more and keeping everything hidden. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke. "In my world," Lyra began softly, "I was raised in a place where no man was allowed to touch me. Not even to help me. My people believe it is sacred. I was kept apart, protected by tradition, but it was also a prison of my own making." Jack listened quietly, trying to process her words. He had never heard of a culture like that. "So, no one ever touched you?" he asked, trying to understand. "No," she said with a slight shake of her head. "It is forbidden. The females of my family are sacred, untouchable. Our people believe we must remain pure, untouched, to maintain our power." Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But you're a person, Lyra. You should be able to make your own choices." Lyra smiled faintly, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I thought so too, but in my world, our traditions are everything. They cannot be broken without consequences." Her gaze turned inward, as if she was struggling with the weight of her past. "I was promised to someone. A marriage arranged by my family. I had no say in the matter. My people wanted me to marry another royal, to unite our families and strengthen our empire. But I never wanted that life. I never wanted to be forced into a marriage without love." Jack's heart went out to her. He had always believed in free will, the right to choose one's path. It seemed cruel to him that someone as beautiful and strong as Lyra was bound by such rigid rules. "I ran away," Lyra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't take it anymore. I left everything behind, my family, my title, my life. I came to Earth hoping to escape the pressures of my world, to find something real." Jack stared at her, trying to imagine what it must have been like for her. He was just an ordinary guy, living the simple life, yet now he was caught in the middle of a story so much bigger than himself. "So, you came here to escape?" Jack asked, his voice gentle. Lyra nodded. "I came here to be free, but now, I'm not sure where I belong. Everything I've known is a lie, and I'm not sure if I can ever go back. But with you, it's different. I feel safe for the first time in my life." Jack felt a surge of protectiveness. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let anything happen to her. "Lyra, you don't have to go back," Jack said, his voice firm. "You can stay here. I'll help you. We'll figure this out together." For the first time since meeting Jack, Lyra smiled. This time, it was genuine, full of hope. The days that followed were a mix of quiet moments and growing tension. Jack and Lyra found themselves adjusting to an unexpected life together. The forest felt more like home to Lyra now, away from the watchful eyes of her people, and Jack couldn't help but feel protective of her. Every day they learned more about each other, and each day brought them closer. Jack showed Lyra the simplest parts of Earth life. He took her to town for groceries, where she was fascinated by the variety of foods, the hustle of people, and the endless rows of colorful produce. Lyra had never seen such freedom, such choices before. Back on her planet, everything was decided for her, from what she ate to whom she would marry. On their walks in the woods, Jack shared stories of his childhood, of his family, and the life he had known. In return, Lyra told him more about her world, the endless stars in her sky, her home planet, and the palace she had fled from. But every time she spoke of her past, a shadow passed over her face. She would grow quiet, as if holding something back. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Jack sat down beside Lyra, watching the last light of the day flicker through the leaves. The air was cool, and the silence was peaceful, but Jack could feel that Lyra had something on her mind. "Lyra, I don't think you've told me everything," Jack said, his voice soft. He wasn't trying to push her, just gently opening the door for her to speak if she wanted to. She turned her head slowly to face him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and uncertainty. "I don't know how to explain it," she said quietly. "My world is so different from yours. I was taught that the females of my family must remain pure, untouched by any male. It's not just a tradition, it's part of who we are." Jack nodded, trying to understand. He had learned that much already, but he could see that there was more, something deeper that was troubling her. "So, how does that make you feel, living like that?" Lyra looked away, her eyes drifting toward the horizon. "It made me feel trapped," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was a prisoner in my own life. And now, being here, on Earth, being with you. It's different. But it scares me, Jack. I've never been close to a male. Not like this. I've never even touched anyone the way I feel. With you. Jack's heart raced, hearing the vulnerability in her words. He wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but he knew this was something she had to come to on her own. You don't have to be scared, Lyra, he said gently. I'm not asking you to change who you are. We can take things slow. Whatever you need, I'm here. Lyra's eyes softened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something warm, something tender between them. It was a connection that was starting to form, unspoken but undeniable. I don't know what the future holds, Jack, Lyra said, her voice shaking slightly. But for the first time, I feel like I'm allowed to make my own choices, and that means everything to me. Jack smiled, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions. He had no idea what the future would bring for them, but one thing was clear. They had something special, something that neither of them had ever expected. And whatever challenges came their way, they would face them together. Whatever happens, we'll face it, Jack said softly. Together. And for the first time in a long time, Lyra believed him. Life seemed to settle into a new rhythm for Jack and Lyra. They spent their days together, exploring the forest and talking about things neither of them had ever shared with anyone before. Jack taught Lyra about Earth's strange customs, while she shared stories of her distant planet, painting pictures of a world far beyond anything he could imagine. But no matter how peaceful things felt, there was always a quiet tension lurking. Lyra was still a fugitive, a princess wanted by her own people. And Jack knew that sooner or later, the calm they had found would be interrupted. That day arrived sooner than Jack expected. It was late afternoon when Jack first noticed the strange noise, a soft, rhythmic hum that seemed to come from nowhere. He stopped walking and turned to Lyra, who had been silently walking beside him. Her face had gone pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. They found me, Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. They've come for me. Before Jack could respond, the sound grew louder, a low hum that vibrated the air. He looked around, trying to make sense of it. Then, from behind a thick group of trees, two sleek, hovering vehicles appeared. Alien ships, designed with smooth, dark surfaces that seemed to shimmer in the light. The vehicles hovered silently above the ground, their engines emitting a faint but powerful hum. Jack's heart raced. These weren't just visitors. They were here for Lyra, and they wouldn't leave without her. Who are they? Jack asked, his voice strained. Lyra's eyes flickered with fear as she took a step back, instinctively pulling Jack behind a large tree. They are emissaries from my home planet, she explained, barely able to control her voice. They're sent to bring me back, no matter the cost. If they take me, I'll be forced to marry someone I don't love. But worse, they will punish you for helping me. Jack's mind was spinning. He had no idea what Lyra's enemies were capable of, but the look on her face was enough to tell him this was serious. We can't let them take you, Jack said firmly, his protective instincts kicking in. He couldn't imagine losing her, especially not like this. Lyra's face hardened, but there was a sadness in her eyes. I know you want to protect me, Jack, but they won't stop. They'll keep coming. And if you fight them, they'll hurt you. You don't understand how powerful they are. It's not just about me anymore. It's about your safety, too. Jack shook his head, refusing to accept that. I don't care. I won't let them take you. We'll figure something out. But just as he spoke, one of the ships landed silently nearby, its hatch opening with a soft hiss. Two alien figures emerged. They were tall, with glowing blue skin and armor that reflected the light in a cold, intimidating way. They were clearly not here for a friendly chat. Lyra stood frozen for a moment, the sight of them making her hesitate. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped forward, her back straight, facing them. I won't go back, she said, her voice full of quiet defiance. The alien emissaries stared at her for a moment, their cold eyes scanning her before one of them spoke in a deep mechanical voice. You have no choice, princess. Return with us. Your people demanded. Jack stepped in front of Lyra, his body tense. She's not going anywhere. The emissary's eyes shifted to Jack, assessing him. One of them raised an eyebrow. You think you can stop us, human? Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't have the power to defeat them, but he wasn't going to back down. Not without a fight. I will, Jack said, his voice unwavering. I'll do whatever it takes to protect her. The tension in the air was thick, and Jack realized that this moment would change everything. No matter what happened next, they were no longer just hiding. They were standing against forces far beyond anything Jack had ever imagined. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let Lyra face this alone. The standoff between Jack and the alien emissaries felt like it stretched on for hours, even though it was only minutes. The air was tense, filled with the hum of the hovering ships and the quiet rustle of the forest around them. Jack stood his ground, heart racing, fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't going to let these cold, alien figures take Lyra away from him, not without a fight. Lyra, standing beside him, seemed smaller than usual. Her shoulders were tense, and her eyes darted nervously between Jack and the emissaries. It was clear she was afraid, but she also knew she couldn't back down now. The taller of the two emissaries spoke again, his voice low and commanding. You don't understand, human. You cannot protect her. She belongs to her people. Her destiny is not yours to decide. Jack felt a surge of anger. She belongs to herself. He shot back, his voice steady but firm. She doesn't belong to anyone but her own choices. The emissary's cold gaze locked onto Jack, his expression unreadable. You are foolish to stand in our way. The princess has made her decision. She is coming with us. Lyra took a step forward, her voice calm but filled with determination. No, I'm not going with you, she said, her gaze fixed on the emissaries. I've made my choice, and it's not a choice you can take from me. The word hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like the world held its breath. Jack could feel Lyra's resolve, her strength. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a woman who had found a new sense of freedom, even if it was just here on Earth, with him. The emissaries exchanged a brief glance. The one who had spoken earlier finally let out a slow breath, as if considering their options. You may refuse now, princess, but you will see. Your actions have consequences. Lyra held her ground, her chin lifted high. I've faced consequences my whole life. I'll face whatever comes next, but not at the cost of my freedom. The emissary gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging the strength in her words. Then, without another word, they turned back to their ship. The hovercraft engines powered up, the sound rising in pitch as the ships prepared to leave. Jack watched them, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. But he knew this wasn't the end. As the ships lifted off and vanished into the sky, Jack turned to Lyra. The air was still, the forest quiet once more, but the tension in Jack's chest hadn't eased. He couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Still, he didn't want to think about that now. He needed to focus on her, on them. Lyra stood there, breathing deeply as she processed what had just happened. Her hand gently reached for Jack's, and he instinctively took it in his. Her touch was warm, and for a moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. Thank you, Lyra said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack squeezed her hand gently. You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing what anyone would do. You deserve to be free, Lyra. She looked at him, her eyes softening, and for the first time, Jack saw the depth of her gratitude and something more. She took a step closer, her voice trembling as she spoke again. I've never trusted anyone like I trust you, Jack. I've never felt this. Alive. For the first time, I feel like I'm in control of my life. Her voice faltered slightly. But it's not just that. It's you. You've made me feel like I matter. Like I'm worth something. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. Her words touched him in a way he hadn't expected, and for the first time since meeting her, he felt a deep connection, something that was more than just a promise to protect. It was a bond, a shared understanding that went beyond words. "I'm not going anywhere, Lyra," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You matter to me more than anything." Lyra's eyes shone as she stepped closer, her hand resting on his chest. "No one has ever said anything like that to me." "You're different, Jack." Jack reached out, gently brushing a lock of her hair behind her ear. "I want you to know something, Lyra. I'm not just here to protect you. I'm here because I want to be with you, all of you." For the first time, Lyra smiled. It was small but real, a smile that reached her eyes, full of hope. "I want that too," she whispered. And in that moment, surrounded by the stillness of the forest, Jack and Lyra both knew their lives had already changed forever. The road ahead would be uncertain, but for the first time, they weren't afraid to face it together. The tension in the air was palpable. Jack and Lyra had barely begun to process what had just happened when the quiet of the forest was shattered by a loud, high-pitched whirring sound. It wasn't the peaceful hum of nature anymore. It was the unmistakable noise of technology, of ships. Jack's heart dropped as he looked up. 2 more alien ships hovered above the trees, their dark forms blocking out the fading sunlight. Lyra's face drained of color as she took a step back, instinctively pulling Jack closer. "They've come back," she whispered, panic evident in her voice. "They won't stop until they take me." Jack's mind raced. He had no idea how these aliens had tracked them down so quickly, but it was clear they weren't just here for a conversation. They were here to take Lyra by force if necessary. "Don't worry," Jack said, trying to keep his voice calm, though he could feel the pressure building inside his chest. "I won't let them take you." But Lyra shook her head. "You don't understand, Jack. These are not just emissaries. They're warriors. If they want me, they'll do anything to get me back. They won't hesitate." Jack clenched his fists. He had no training for this kind of situation, no idea how to fight against armed, technologically advanced aliens. But he wasn't going to stand by and let them take her. He had to protect her. For a brief moment, a plan began to form in his mind, but it was a long shot. The ships were closing in, and they didn't have much time. "I don't care what they are," Jack said, determination hardening his voice. "They're not taking you. Not on my watch." The 2 ships landed silently, their engines powering down as the metallic doors slid open. Out stepped 3 figures, tall and imposing in dark armor. They moved with a practiced, dangerous grace, their weapons at the ready. The leader, a tall alien with pale, silver skin, stepped forward. His eyes glowed faintly, like they were seeing straight through Jack. "You have made a mistake, human," the alien said, his voice deep and resonant. "The princess belongs to us. You cannot protect her. Step aside, and we will leave you unharmed." Jack didn't move. "She's not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. "She doesn't belong to you." The alien's gaze shifted to Lyra, who stood beside Jack. Her eyes were wide, but there was a flicker of defiance in them. "You should come with us, princess," the alien continued. "You cannot hide here forever. Your people will never accept your defiance." Lyra took a deep breath and stepped forward, standing tall. "I've made my choice," she said firmly. "And I won't go back. I refuse to live a life of fear, bound by a tradition I never agreed to." Jack glanced at her, surprised by the strength in her voice. He had never seen her this resolute before. There was no going back for them now. The alien's expression darkened, and he raised his weapon, aiming it at Jack. "Then we will take you by force, human. And the consequences will be severe." Jack's heart raced, but he didn't back down. "If you want to fight, you've got one." Lyra's hand shot out, grabbing Jack's arm. "No," she said urgently. "Jack, don't. They'll kill you." Jack met her gaze, his eyes softening. "I'm not afraid. I won't let them hurt you. Trust me." Lyra hesitated for a moment before nodding. I trust you. Just as the alien stepped forward to strike, a loud sound broke the tension. The roar of a distant engine. The emissary paused, looking over his shoulder as the other ship began to move again. Jack took advantage of the distraction. He lunged forward, grabbing a nearby rock and throwing it with all his strength at the alien. The stone hit the emissary square in the chest, knocking him back for a moment. Run, Jack shouted to Lyra, pulling her by the hand. Without hesitation, they dashed into the trees, Jack leading the way as fast as he could. Behind them, the aliens shouted, but they didn't follow immediately. They were regrouping, preparing for the next move. Jack's mind raced as they ran through the thick forest. They needed a plan, and fast. But as he glanced at Lyra, running beside him, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her go without a fight. The showdown had only just begun. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of their hurried footsteps, the rustling of leaves beneath their feet, and the distant hum of the alien ships. Jack pulled Lyra through the trees, heart pounding, lungs burning. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Where could they go? How could they escape? The woods seemed endless, but there was no telling how much time they had before the aliens caught up with them. Jack, Lyra gasped, her voice strained. We can't keep running. They'll catch us eventually. Jack didn't stop, but his mind was already working. He knew she was right. The aliens had the technology to track them down, and the longer they ran, the more danger they'd be in. He had no idea how they could escape, but he couldn't give up. Not now. We need to find somewhere to hide, Jack said, glancing around. The trees were thick here, but there was no cover, no shelter. I know a place, Lyra said suddenly, her voice urgent. She grabbed Jack's arm and tugged him to the left, leading him off the path they had been following. Follow me. Without waiting for a response, Lyra led the way deeper into the forest, moving with a sense of purpose Jack hadn't seen before. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, and Jack trusted her completely. They were moving faster now, almost as if she had a destination in mind. After a few minutes, Lyra came to a stop in front of a large, thick tree. Its trunk was wide, with roots that twisted and turned around rocks, forming a natural barrier. She knelt down quickly, pulling away a section of the roots, revealing a small hidden space beneath the tree. Jack blinked in surprise. You've been here before. Lyra nodded. I used to come here when I wanted to be alone. It's hidden. They won't find us here, not for a while. Without hesitation, Jack ducked into the small space, followed by Lyra. The ground was soft with old leaves, and there was just enough room for both of them to crouch down. Jack glanced up at Lyra, noticing the look of determination on her face. But beneath it, there was a flicker of fear. He could see it in her eyes. We'll be safe here, Jack said, trying to reassure her. But Lyra didn't seem convinced. She was tense, her gaze distant, her hands clenched in her lap. Jack, this won't be over just because we hide. The emissaries will keep coming. They'll find us. And when they do, her voice trailed off, the weight of what was at stake sinking in. Jack took her hand, his grip firm. We don't know that for sure. We have time to think, to plan. We don't have to run forever. Lyra looked at him, and for a moment there was silence. Then she spoke again, her voice softer, almost hesitant. I can't go back to that life, Jack, she said quietly. I can't go back to being a prisoner, to living by rules that aren't mine. But if I stay here with you, I risk everything. My family, my people, everything I've ever known. I don't know if I can live with that. Jack's heart ached for her. He could see how torn she was, how deeply the decision weighed on her. She had never had the freedom to choose for herself before. But now, she had a choice, and it was the hardest one she would ever make. You don't have to choose between your people and me, Jack said softly. But you do have to choose for yourself. Whatever happens, I'll be with you. But you need to decide what you want. What you really want. Lyra's eyes filled with emotion, and she took a deep breath. For a moment, there was a long silence, as if she were weighing the consequences of her decision. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. I've never been free before, Jack. Not truly. But here, with you, I feel like I can be. I want to live. I want to be free. I want to be with you. A sense of relief washed over Jack. He squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of her words. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about choosing a future together. A future they could create for themselves, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. We'll make it work, Lyra, Jack said, his voice full of determination. We'll figure it out together. In that moment, they both knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but no matter what came their way, they had each other, and that was enough. The night felt colder than usual as Jack and Lyra huddled together in their hidden spot beneath the great tree. The forest around them was silent, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Jack had no idea how long they would stay hidden, but he was determined to protect Lyra. She had made her choice, and now they had to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. The moonlight filtered through the canopy above, casting soft, dappled shadows across the ground. Jack sat with his back against the tree, Lyra sitting beside him. She had grown quieter over the last few hours, her mind likely racing with thoughts of her people, the life she had left behind. Jack couldn't imagine the weight of her decision, but he knew one thing. She had chosen freedom. Are you okay? Jack asked softly, breaking the silence. Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting the light of the moon. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice low. I've never had the freedom to choose for myself before. Everything in my life was decided for me. My future, my marriage, even my thoughts. But now, I'm free. And it terrifies me. Jack reached over, placing his hand on hers. I understand. But you're not alone, Lyra. We're in this together. She nodded slowly, squeezing his hand in return. I never thought I'd find someone like you. Someone who sees me for who I really am. Not just the princess they expect me to be. Jack smiled, warmth spreading through him. You're more than just a princess, Lyra. You're a person. You have every right to choose your own path, no matter what anyone else thinks. Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time in days, she seemed to relax. I never thought I could have a life like this. I always thought my destiny was set in stone. But here, with you, I feel like anything is possible. Jack's heart swelled with emotion. He had always believed in following his own path, in choosing his own future. Now he saw that Lyra had the same strength. She had made a choice, one that would change everything for her, and he was proud of her. We'll make our own future, Jack said, his voice firm. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Lyra leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. I never imagined I could feel this way, she whispered. So free, so alive. Jack wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. We'll figure out the next step when the time comes. Right now, just know that you're not alone. You never have to be again. The warmth of his words soothed Lyra, and she closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax in his embrace. It felt like they were in their own little world, safe for the moment. But Jack knew the peace wouldn't last forever. The aliens would be back, and they would be relentless. But for now, they had time. Time to be together, to start fresh, and to build something new. As the night deepened, Jack and Lyra remained in the quiet of the forest, the weight of their decision still hanging in the air. They knew the challenges ahead would be great, but they also knew they would face them, side by side. And in that moment, that was enough. They had chosen each other, and nothing could change that. The days that followed felt like a blur. Jack and Lyra spent their time hiding in the forest, constantly moving to new locations to avoid detection. The fear of being found by the emissaries was always in the back of their minds, but there was something else growing between them. a quiet strength, an unspoken understanding that kept them going even when everything seemed uncertain. Jack had never imagined his life would take such a dramatic turn. One moment, he was a simple guy enjoying his peaceful life, and the next, he was in the middle of an adventure that could change the course of two worlds. But in the midst of all the chaos, one thing was clear. He was in this with Lyra, and no matter what came next, he would never leave her side. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the trees, Jack and Lyra sat on a large rock overlooking a small clearing. The forest was peaceful, the quiet only broken by the chirping of distant birds. Lyra was quiet, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt as she thought. Jack watched her, noticing how much stronger she seemed now, compared to the woman who had arrived on Earth just days ago, uncertain and afraid. "What's on your mind?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Lyra turned her head, her eyes meeting his. There was a softness in her gaze, a look of calmness he hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said quietly. "We can't stay hidden forever. I know that, but I don't want to go back to the life I ran from. I don't want to go back to the palace, to the expectations, to being trapped in a world I never chose." Jack nodded. He understood. The decision to leave her royal life behind had been one of the hardest things she'd ever done, and he knew she had no intention of returning to it. "I don't think you should go back," Jack said, his voice firm. "You don't have to. You've already made your choice, and that's your right. You deserve to live your life the way you want, not the way someone else tells you to." Lyra smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I never thought I could have a choice. But now, with you, I feel like I have the freedom to be whoever I want to be." Jack reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "And you are whoever you choose to be, Lyra. I'll be here for you, no matter what happens." Lyra squeezed his hand, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Jack. You've shown me a world I didn't know existed, one where I can actually make decisions for myself. You've given me something I never thought I'd have. Hope." Jack smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "You gave that to yourself, Lyra. I'm just happy I get to be part of it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences heavy between them, but somehow also comforting. Jack knew that there were still challenges ahead, that the emissaries would eventually find them. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. "I don't know what the future holds," Lyra said softly, her eyes gazing out over the clearing. "But I know one thing for sure. I want to face it with you." Jack's heart swelled as he looked at her, his voice filled with certainty. "Whatever comes, Lyra, we'll face it together, and we'll build a future, one where you can finally be free." The two of them sat there, side by side, watching the last rays of sunlight fade away. The future was still uncertain, but in that moment, they didn't need to know exactly what would happen. All they knew was that they had each other, and that was the most important thing. Together, they could face anything. And with that, they knew that the hardest part of their journey was behind them. The rest was just waiting for them to make their own way. The days turned into weeks as Jack and Lyra adjusted to their new life. They moved from place to place, staying hidden, always on the lookout for any sign of the emissaries. Jack had never thought of himself as a fugitive, but now, every day felt like a small victory. They were free. They were together. But freedom wasn't without its challenges. They had to live cautiously, avoiding the towns and cities where they could easily be spotted. Every time they heard a plane or a car in the distance, their hearts would race, but they always found a way to keep moving, to stay one step ahead. One evening, as they set up camp in a small cave hidden in the side of a hill, Lyra sat by the fire, her face illuminated by the warm glow. Jack watched her from across the fire, thinking about how much she had changed. When she first arrived on Earth, she had been frightened, unsure of herself, unsure of her future. But now, there was a quiet confidence in her eyes. She had found herself, and with it, a sense of peace. "Do you think they'll ever stop looking for us?" Lyra asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it. Jack poked the fire, watching the flames dance. "I don't know, but I do know one thing. We'll keep moving forward. They may find us one day, but that doesn't mean we have to give up. We'll keep going, and we'll keep fighting for our future." Lyra looked at him, her eyes softening. "I never thought I'd find someone like you, Jack. Someone who would fight for me, someone who would help me be free. Back home, I was never allowed to choose anything for myself. I was always told what to do, where to go, who to marry. But now, with you, it feels like I'd finally have control of my own life." Jack smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You've always had control, Lyra. You just had to find it. And now that you have, we can make a life together. Whatever that life looks like, it's ours to decide." Lyra's smile was small but genuine. "I don't know what the future holds, Jack, but with you by my side, I'm not afraid." Jack felt the weight of her words. He didn't know what the future held either, but he knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together. They had already overcome so much, and no matter what happened, that bond would never break. "Neither am I," Jack said quietly. "We'll figure it out, one day at a time. But I promise you this, I will always be by your side." Lyra reached across the fire, taking his hand in hers. For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in their quiet corner of the world. There was so much still to face, so much uncertainty, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was enough. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above them, Jack and Lyra knew that their journey wasn't over. It had only just begun, but for the first time, they felt ready to face whatever came next, together. And for the first time, Lyra truly felt free.